Okay, so for this episode of the podcast, I have someone I've been following on social media for a good while now. I've loved his work and I've seen his page grow immensely, and I think that's almost an understatement. And I don't want to say too much because I'll let him introduce himself, but I do want to say, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time out to come and speak to me. I really do appreciate that. And then maybe you can introduce yourself and we'll go from there.
Well, Leo, I appreciate it. And trust me, you've been supporting and sharing and engaging with what I've been doing for quite a long time. And I was honored that you had asked me. So I've been a personal trainer for about 11 and a half years, 6 in a commercial gym. So I know that you said a lot of your audience are enthusiasts and people who are starting out and, various different goals. So I've seen it all on, my lifetime in commercial gyms. I've been working out for about 20 years. So, despite the fact that I'm where I am in the industry, I once started out too and committed to it. And I understand the power of what the gym and working out and that lifestyle has done for me. And I'm very passionate about helping others, inspiring people to get started, providing valuable tools, the evidence-based stuff that breaks away from a lot of the myth and misinformation and predatory marketing that our industry can sometimes have, which can feel overwhelming. And along my journey, I was lucky enough to start my own business. I contract out of a friend's facility, and that allowed me to have my podcast, which has been running now for, it's 4.5 years for sure. It's called the Lift Free and Diet Hard Podcast. Again, a bit more geared towards probably other trainers, but still fun. And then I started writing, which led to being able to write for some big fitness publications like T Nation, Generation Iron, most recently Muscle and Fitness magazine. So that's something I love. And I love to travel within the industry, and going to fitness events has turned into invitations to speak at those fitness events. So I have a number of those coming up. So a lot of really amazing stuff's happened. And along the way, I started embracing Instagram. Figure that's a very good vehicle to reach more people. And it's grown really rapidly in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, I've noticed that because I still remember when I followed you. I think we had this conversation before, because I remember specifically where I was in Japan, because I wasn't in that place very long. And that was about June 2020. And I remember, I think you had this is a wild guess, it was probably around 3K followers. And now I know and I was just looking at your page today just to see, just to, give it a look before we have our chat. And I saw it was on 44K now. So, and I listened to your podcast with Eric Roberts recently, just out of curiosity, because Eric Roberts is in the same mentorship as myself. And so I just thought, this would be cool to hear how he's doing the one with Jordan Sayat. And you were talking to him about his rapid growth, which there is no denying. It was insane. He's got 1 million followers on TikTok, and just for the listener, he's got about 1 million followers on TikTok in, I think it was in about a year or something like that, or maybe a year and a half. But I think for even most people to still go from 3K to 44K is tremendous. So what would you put that down
to? There's a couple of things, and this shows up in presentations and things I've written too, for anybody who's interested in this sort of thing. It's a concurrent 2 sort of streams. And Eric does one of these extraordinarily well, but he didn't necessarily double down hard on the other, whereas I've kind of done both. So the first thing that both Eric and I have done, and he's just done on a much grander level, is create really shareable, engaging content. Now, actually, I suppose it's probably the same. The difference is Eric has embraced TikTok, which I encourage fitness professionals to do, which you're part of Jordan Sayat's mentorship, where Beth Farraco's in it and Eric is in it. And Beth is the same thing. She's had massive growth on TikTok, and then it's backfilled into growth on Instagram. So these people have embraced an ecosystem that has available real estate, because TikTok gets more organic reach, so more people are able to follow them. And when you create really good, really engaging, really polished is the wrong word, but Eric figures out that you go right into the hook versus a slow introduction, because people want to see, they want to be hooked really quickly, or else they're going to scroll and they're going to look for something else that engages them. So you have to be really engaging with people. Give them a reason to stick around, respond to what you're doing, share it, to follow you. And the same rules are applied to Instagram. The Instagram scalability is not as rapid as it is on TikTok anymore, which makes TikTok really appealing to people who want that massive scalable growth and reach. But I still think Instagram is a bit more of the hub for the, building credibility and authority in the fitness industry. So that's a second avenue that I've also doubled down really hard on. So that is writing for the big publications. It is having the podcast. It is developing a network with a lot of, fitness professionals across the world, especially a lot of the established, authorities, leaders in the industry. And then you get into things like, speaking and presenting and educating, which again gives you this credibility and authority that goes vastly beyond just a social media presence. There are people who've done really well traditionally. Carter Good is a great example because Carter was mentored by Jordan Syatt. He's the previous generation. In 2017, infographics blew up. Jordan Syatt had told Carter Good, here you go and do these infographics. And they started doing really well. So Jordan himself went and doubled down on those infographics. He's told the story on my podcast before. And so did his partner, Susan Niebergall, who's an old part of his mentorship, who became his partner in the inner circle, right? So you're seeing a lot of examples of this kind of success. It works if you really attack it. And then Sohee Lee, Spencer Nadolsky, who already had a ton of credibility and authority with all the media and the brand building they've done, they really embrace it. So a lot of these people saw like really rapid growth in their social media back around 2017. And now they're leveraging that to great benefit today to help more people, to support their businesses, et cetera. And there's sort of a new generation of that stuff that is going through Jordan and Mike's mentorship and people otherwise who just have said, TikTok is where I'm going to really work hard and grow. And you can backfeed it and double it into Reels on Instagram, where Instagram is now preferentially letting Reels get in front of a lot of people. So as far as the social media growth side, this is where it's at. For the user who may not necessarily be a fitness professional, this is important to you because you can recognize and find people who are sharing good information, but and I don't like harping on the bad stuff, but there's a lot of problem information out there. And it becomes discerning what's good, what's helpful versus what's not good. And when you feel confused by this stuff, I mean, anybody, first of all, who's listening to this podcast and they're following your media, they're already looking for good quality information, right? They would self-select to that. So they're far more likely to follow people like a Jordan Syatt, a Sohee Lee, a Spencer Nadolsky, or an Eric Roberts than they would to go and watch The Liver King. And he's a good example of the opposite end of this, if you're familiar with him, if not Google. And he's obviously on a lot of performance enhancing drugs, and I don't care about policing that stuff, but he claims that he looks the way he does because he's naturally just eats a lot of liver and organ meat and all this sort of stuff. And so he grabbed onto some really extreme real estate because people like extreme stuff. Carnivore is not extreme enough anymore, right? Carnivore was extreme before, was extreme compared to, say, keto dieting, right? Now, keto is so mainstream that the carnivore crowd, a couple of the doctors that branded themselves around that, carnivore is extreme. But now there's a guy that came along and said, hold my beer, let's do something crazier than carnivore. And, maybe people have heard of the snake diet guy. He's literally local here in Edmonton, and I've met him. He's an awful human being, but he preaches this really extreme fasting as a way to lose weight. I mean, okay, we already now know that the intermittent fasting stuff is, quote, not better than other calorie restricted interventions, right? There's no special magic behind intermittent fasting. Now, if it works for you, your lifestyle, your schedule, you feel good, you have good energy, and you're otherwise being smart about getting enough protein, then the meal timing doesn't really matter too much. So use a system that works for you. I can't get behind the logic on carnivore because while some people, it's really appealing to people who have a lot of dietary intolerances because they feel better. So therefore, logic equates to, well, if I feel better, this is healthier for me. But the long-term, risks to colorectal cancers and other gastrointestinal disorders and your cholesterol and cardiovascular health are probably pretty scary. So that's the sort of thing I'd be talking to a qualified physician on, right? So just be careful with that stuff. But yeah, if you decide you want to, time restrict your meals, okay, be careful that it doesn't become this pseudoscientific validation to engage in disordered eating, like binging, right? We restrict, and then it's an all-out binge of calories at one end of the day. And I think it could be really attractive to someone who has disordered eating behavior, or at least disordered thinking. So I know I'm wandering a little bit there, but hopefully this stuff is actually helpful and illustrative to people who are kind of trying to navigate this.
No, you're definitely not. It was good because it actually brought up another, definitely a follow-up point that I wanted to make to that. So all right, say like I'm just getting started on my fitness journey. I've probably heard 1,000,001 things by now. I've probably tried a few times before and it hasn't been very successful. How can I tell, going online, going into TikTok, going onto Instagram, what is good information and what is bad information? What's helpful?
We have to put ourselves in the shoes of the beginner and then remove all the things we already know. So we can say, oh, it's evidence-based, or it's this or it's that. But someone starting out doesn't necessarily have that foundation. I would be cautious with people who speak in very absolute terms, make extreme claims, anything that claims that sounds just too good to be true. And especially if you admit to yourself, hey, I've been struggling with this, I do feel desperate. If you're prone to kind of wanting a simple solution to a complex problem and someone's selling you that solution, those are red flags. And it becomes looking inward and saying, all right, am I really willing to make some changes, but try to find a sustainable approach? And if you find people with messaging and media that seems to be more reasonable, less extreme, more nuanced, it may not be as sexy, but that's probably a good place to start. And a lot of the names that I've just said, again, your Dr. Spencer Andolsky, your Jordan Syatt, your Sohee Lee, your Eric Roberts, your Susan Niebergall, they're good places to start. And there are a lot of other really good people in the industry. I wouldn't overwhelm yourself with 50 to 100 different qualified fitness professionals. Maybe if you're just looking to get started in the gym and lose weight, while PhDs like Brett Bartholomew and Brad Schoenfeld are really, really smart guys when it comes to muscle hypertrophy research in the case of Schoenfeld, or business leadership at Brett Bartholomew and coaching and communication. But they're wonderful humans. Follow them if you want, but maybe don't necessarily go down their rabbit hole when you're looking for stuff that Eric and Jordan and Sohee do really well, right? If you're a woman who is confused about some of the various different aspects about how training affects you, maybe you're going into Molly Galbraith stuff. Sohee Lee again does a really good job with this stuff. Again, Susan Niebergall does a wonderful job with this stuff. Someone that you might relate to. If you're a little on the, if you're an older adult and you feel intimidated by some of the stuff, again, Susan Niebergall, she's 60, right? She's ripped, she can do weighted chin-ups, so she's definitely like an outlier, but she's got a very kind and nuanced message and very supportive. So again, because anyone listening here is already self-selecting, I think maybe the starting point is to go follow some of the people that we've just mentioned. And as you get more comfortable on your journey, the people who are aligned with that world, you can go and search for the things that you're interested in. You could look at someone like Brianna Battles, if you're a woman, again, who's looking for more information on, how their mental health or postpartum affects their fitness. Like those are topics that go outside of my area of expertise, and I'm really happy to go follow this person. She's great.
Yeah. And I think, first of all, the fitness professionals you mentioned, like Sohee Lee, Jordan Syatt, Susan Niebergall, who, by the way, I had on the podcast last week, and it was really lovely speaking to her. She told me that when I go to Texas next month, she's going to show me the best donut shop in Dallas. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, they're all really good people to follow. So if you're listening, definitely check out their pages. I'll even link it. I could even link it in the show notes, perhaps. And hopefully I remember. And
if you're in Dallas, you're going to Dallas, go to the Pecan Lodge for your barbecue, okay? The Pecan Lodge, as in pecan pie, right?
Okay.
So Pecan Lodge. Sohee and I went and had lunch there because she invited me into town. This is early 2019, because Lane Norton, who she used to work with, and Brad Schoenfeld, a few others there was a one-day seminar down there. So I got to go down and meet Lane Norton. Now, Lane is a great source of information. Now, Lane is also very bombastic, so he may not be everybody's cup of tea. but he's good at beating myth and misinformation about nutrition. So you might like that. So yeah, so I got to go down and hang out with them and my friend Derek Stanley, who's just about an hour away. And so he and I went to the Pecan launch, and it was awesome.
Pecan,
Get the burnt end.
I'll have to remember that for sure. Yeah, and I think what you said about people speaking in absolutes, I think that's happening more than ever now, especially when you've only got like 3 seconds, 2 seconds to catch someone's attention. It's like, and I see, everyone, I think they start with their video with something called a hook, and it's like the best way to do this or the best way to do that. So I think it is becoming more overwhelming than maybe ever. I don't know.
Yeah. It's language like you hear a lot of always or never, or, yeah, it's nuanced for sure. It's one of those things you have to expose yourself to a little bit of it to get a feel for what someone is claiming. If someone claims that a particular dietary ideology is the best or the only way to do it, approach those people with caution, especially if their branding is around that dietary ideology.
Yeah, and a lot of people just don't like to hear it depends when it usually is going to depend.
Well, the answer, it depends, is a useless answer if it doesn't go into, an actual helpful, nuanced answer exactly. that ultimately answers the person's question.
And and actually going back to, so when we were at the start of our conversation, you were mentioning obviously with the growth that you had on social media. This is actually something I've been thinking about quite a bit recently, because I've been trying to reduce mine. Would you say like you have, or maybe not, but like, is there like maybe rules or guidelines you set around screen time, like trying to reduce that? Like, how do you find screen time and navigating that?
It's a battle, right? And I think there are people like Eric and I talked about this recently, and he's pretty good about it. You want to, in theory, set some boundaries around how much time you're on there. And I have definitely found that the growth and the trade-off between being very present and engaged and responding to things can be distracting and addictive, right? Those are real things. I actually asked my last podcast guest, a guy named Brandon Sen, who doesn't have a big social media following, if he could, tomorrow wake up with 1 million Instagram followers, right? And if you asked me that, I would say, no, I don't want that, because I know what it feels like to have the current number I have, which is about 1/20th of that, right? And my ultimate goal is to probably, get to and, sustain and engage with about 100,000 people. I mean, chances are it'll grow gradually over time, but, I'm more aggressively seeking that. But then you get to a point where you're better off having a relationship and engage with and leverage the contacts that you have versus just infinitely scale and try to attract more, because you're also going to attract a bit more negativity too, which isn't common, but it happens. And I don't think everybody is wired for this. So trust me when I say, if you're a fitness professional and you're trying to seek a larger following, do it very intentionally. And I think it's a good idea to set some ground rules and some boundaries around how you approach it. I didn't, and I'm playing a little bit of catch up with that. I'm getting a lot better at it. And sometimes it's just making sure that you're away from the phone while I'm working on writing or obviously coaching my clients, right? Like, that is a sort of a haven from it, because I really enjoy being immersed in, I'm still a full-time coach. I don't have full time to engage with social media. So I have to make sure that it doesn't creep into my downtime and my personal time.
Yeah. I found
it's tricky.
Oh, go on.
I just said it's tricky. You have to be careful about it.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's not easy, especially for, I think, people who, and maybe not necessarily a fitness professional, but maybe just anyone who's perhaps working online more, which is obviously a popular thing nowadays. I remember during the pandemic, I was struggling with it quite a bit. I could easily be behind my phone for a good while. I found personally, if you're listening, I found a really good tip was so for the screen time, you can set a widget on the home screen, and that's what I done. So I put a widget there, and then every time that's like staring back at me in the face, and I can just see it gradually going up throughout the day. And I just find it makes me put my phone down a lot more compared to before. Yeah,
it's like having a bottle of water on your desk if one of the challenges that you're trying to work on is to drink more water during the day, right? Which is a pretty basic habit that some people struggle with. Put it right in front of you. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's something I get asked about a lot. How can you increase your water intake? And that actually reminds me of something. So sometimes I'll put on my story like, what would you like my next podcast topic to be about? Sometimes I'll make a quick 15-minute podcast and then speak about that specific topic. And recently, so the subject of glute training won, and I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. So I thought, you know what, maybe we can do that here right now. And
Sure.
basically, it was the main theme around like glute training, how to get it bigger, like how to grow it, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, uh, and then what should you take into account from there.
Well, let's actually talk about glute training because it's not something that I've, branded around. So there's going to be some nuance here. First of all, there are individuals in the industry who have branded around glute training. And I know one of those individuals, and there's a few others that I don't know anything about them. And you want to approach this stuff with caution. Recently, a guy who had been sort of branded around, I'd never heard of him before, big TikTok following. I think he had apparently bought a lot of it, had come under fire for a lot of inappropriate behavior with women, like we're
Yeah.
talking about a lot. So, I kind of kept an eye on what was going on with this because I wanted to understand. And I don't necessarily think that male trainers who exclusively brand around glute training and training women are necessarily a red flag, but it's at least worth kind of keeping an eye on that sort of stuff, right? And then just look at their behavior. If you see on their media that they're touching their clients inappropriately, their face is down, like right in, a woman's crotch, and just position himself in what seems like really creepy sort of places. And I've noticed a few people like this. Okay, approach that stuff with caution, right? So that's just about like where you're getting your information about glutes. There's a lot of people who do really good glute training information. The basics, glutes are a muscle just like anything else. You need to load it, you need to train it hard, you need to train it relatively heavy, classic hypertrophy rep ranges of 8 to 12 with some work, a little heavier and a higher rep again. So vary your rep ranges, but a lot of the classic 8 to 12 stuff. While you can build muscle at any rep range, the very, very heavy low rep stuff takes more rest between sets. It's tougher on the joints. It's not very efficient for a goal of muscle growth. If you're doing everything to sets of 30 to 50, well, have you ever done a set of anything 30 to 50? It's terrible, right? If you're doing most of your stuff that way, again, it's not an efficient way to do it. And the classic bodybuilder 8 to 12 is a really efficient place to be. So spend most of your time there. And then you want to do things that hit the glutes hard, that overload them. So squatting is good. The barbell hip thrust, like my pal, the muscle doc, Jordan Shallow, who's a really smart guy, he hates barbell hip thrusting. He does not think it works. Whereas the overwhelming majority of the industry seem to like it, and I've used it a fair bit. So I still think it's a valuable exercise. It's got a shorter range of motion. Things like Romanian deadlifts are fantastic. Use them. Lunges, split squats, especially versions that keep your shin more vertical, fantastic for it. I'm really not sold on the idea that like a lot of sumo deadlifting is going to be one of the better ways to target glutes. I think it's just basically just a strength exercise. Again, if you like it, you lift heavy, you do the volume, I think it's not going to hurt. Squatting is going to be great for your glutes. And then you can add in things like reverse hypers. If you get like a glute drive hip thrust machine, those things are great as well. And then if you want to sprinkle in a little bit of the smaller stuff like fire hydrants and band work, okay. If you're really hell-bent on like really crazy glute growth, that stuff got popular. And then it sort of is now popular to tear it apart and tear it down. If you're only doing body weight, booty stuff and a lot of band stuff, I promise you're not going to get very far. But if you throw it in as a little bit of extra because you have the time and the recovery capacity and your glutes are the primary focus, sure. I don't see any downside to it, but you're not going to get very far if you don't focus on your squatting, lunge variations, deadlifting variations, especially Romanian deadlifts, and hip thrusts. I'm going to say it like I think those are pretty good. And then other hip extension movements. You get a glute ham raise machine or a hip extension bench. And I think that, and especially, and then training frequency. So if you're doing it once a week, okay, not bad. Maybe hitting them twice a week is probably going to be better. And if your lower body growth is your priority and you're a fairly experienced trainee, well, you may want to put some of your upper body stuff into more of a maintenance volume while you very aggressively pursue growth on the lower body. Can you train them all together and grow everything? Of course you can, absolutely. But then look at How much time do you have to train each week? Are you optimizing your nutrition? Are you getting good enough sleep? If you're not sleeping well, then you're not going to make optimal progress on muscle growth. Are you trying to diet and lose body fat at the same time you're trying to aggressively grow your glutes? We wouldn't do that with any other muscle group, so it doesn't work here either. And often it's women who are more interested in holding their glutes. And women on average, more often face a little bit more pressure than men to look a certain way, right? I mean, I think we all have aesthetic goals, but like, let's say professional athletes, when was the last time, outside of like Cristiano Ronaldo, who's already got the abs, did you hear people criticizing or critiquing what men are wearing, or like how fit they are? There are occasionally examples within sport where I'm a Blue Jays fan. I'm in Canada. So Vladimir Guerrero Jr., young star, he was overweight his first probably season or so, and he was the number one prospect in all of baseball. And then he got himself in shape, and then he went off and he had an MVP caliber season. Sure, that's relevant in terms of performance, but it's not like they were critiquing him for how he looked. Whereas female athletes, tennis players, especially over the years, I've grown up watching a lot of tennis, would often face scrutiny over their physical appearance. And that can trickle down to everyday women. But point being, I wouldn't try to aggressively pursue losing body fat and growing muscle at the same time, unless you're a total beginner. And even then, right, I would probably direct your efforts, go through a phase where you're aggressively trying to build muscle, be in a minor calorie surplus, not something that's going to spill over to a ton of body fat, and then maybe do mini cuts with your nutrition so that way you can make sure your body fat's not getting, too high. So that's my philosophy towards glute growth. You have to create an optimal recovery and growth environment too. It's just as important as the training.
Yeah, I think you covered it super well there. I couldn't get into any more depth. I think, as you mentioned towards the end, I think what I see often is that someone will be, they do tend to be a beginner, really wanting to push the glute growth, but they'll also want to be in a calorie deficit at the same time, and they kind of want everything. And I don't think they understand. As a beginner, they can definitely make great gains anywhere, really. If you're a complete beginner, if they've always done nothing and then they go to doing something, they can definitely make a rapid muscle growth. But there will come a certain point, if you're always in a calorie deficit, it's going to be quite tough, as you said. But otherwise, there was I think we covered that super well. There's nothing I'd really add to the end of that. I didn't want to ask you, because I know you're an avid reader, and I really wanted to, while you're here, ask you about, do you have any books that you'd recommend, maybe in the past year? Like, I know there's going to be tons. So maybe let's say like top 3 in the past 12 months that you really loved or really stand out to you. Maybe they're coming to your head right now and you'd probably recommend them.
God, I couldn't distill down to that. I'll throw out a few. I mean, again, it depends on what people are interested in. So let's go, I think, for general life success with hints of, happiness and fulfillment. A book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant was written by Eric Jorgensen. Naval is a venture capitalist turned internet philosopher on Twitter. Really interesting guy. I like his stuff. And he's got that book that talks a lot about business, finance, success principles, happiness, and just well-being stuff. So I think that one, it's actually a short, easy read. That's one of my all-time favorites. The book, The Practice by Seth Godin, I always go back to. I love Seth Godin's stuff. It's definitely about, I don't want to call it a productivity book. It's about creating media and building business and doing the work, basically. So that one is a great book. And I think those kind of skew maybe a bit more towards the business side. If you got someone who's really just starting out on their fitness journey and trying to work on themselves, Brene Brown writes great stuff. I think if you could expose yourself to Brene Brown's writing, she's got several books, you're going to be a better person for it. We have a polarized world, very extreme, and we've got 2 very loud, hostile extremes at the very far ends of the spectrum that people could think represents the majority of people. And I'm talking about social stuff, I'm talking about political stuff, and I definitely don't like getting into those topics. And I find Brene is really good at the nuance of it, about, she talks about vulnerability and shame, and understanding, our relationship with these things can often help a lot. You get into concepts like guilt and shame as it relates to, our habits. How many people listening feel like they struggle with disordered eating patterns, and maybe they restrict, and then they binge on a weekend and they feel totally out of control of it, and then they feel shame over it, and it's something very difficult to talk about and share. And understanding what our shame triggers are can go a long way. So Brené Brown's work as a whole is really good stuff, whether it's her book Daring Greatly or Dare to Lead or Brave in the Wilderness. Her first one, I thought it was just me, but it isn't. It's actually one of her best. And then her most recent one, Atlas of the Heart, is really good. It's really accessible. I think in getting Brené's ideas in your mind, in your world, can go a long way to making you feel better about a lot of different things.
I think I definitely have to, you've sold it to me. I'm going to have to check it out. I have to definitely download it.
Yeah, I mean, a very specific example that she, in at least a couple places, refers to is about the dangers of using dehumanizing language. And, I would characterize Brené as leaning, more left on the political spectrum and social spectrum than she is right, for sure. But we see people on both sides of that spectrum, especially politicians and political figures and talking heads, will vilify and demonize and sometimes use dehumanizing language to describe other people. A politician here locally a few years back who was on the left side of the spectrum called people who are criticizing her sewer rats, as an example.
Oh, okay.
Now, the first step towards really turning things hostile towards any group of people in society, no matter what their belief systems are, is to start using language like that, because you start using dehumanizing language and you make those people, quote, less than human, which makes it okay to treat them in unimaginable ways. And it's a very slippery slope, and there's some very nasty historical examples. Most prominent would be the Holocaust. I'm going to leave that there because we're talking about some really dark shit that's off topic. And a lot of people don't want to necessarily explore that kind of heavy stuff. But again, Brené, really good value system, really good principles. I think it can help someone explore their own history with complicated emotions like shame and guilt. And I'll give one more illustration. She differentiates shame and guilt as if you've gone and done something that you feel bad about, and you feel guilty. That's like saying, I did a bad thing. You're separating you, yourself, and your identity from the behavior. But shame is more rooted in, I am a bad person. I am stupid. I'm a failure. And the struggle and the, quote, bad thing is rooted in your identity. And if you're constantly stuck in a cycle of shame thinking, it becomes very difficult because you convince yourself through negative self-talk that you're incapable of improving. And so a lot of those people just tend to turn around and admit defeat, accept it, and they're never able to change. Whereas people who think in terms of, well, guilt, my interpretation, it's okay to feel guilty about doing something. I don't want it to fester in a negative way, but at least you can turn around and identify, okay, what I just did there didn't help me towards my life goals. It's not moving me forward. And in future, I can change how I respond to the situation I was in, and I can do better. And yeah, you're not stuck in the shame cycle. So again, if this resonates with people, go check out Brené Brown's work.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like it's worth it, because you might relate to with me on this one. This was actually something I was speaking on. It was probably my last podcast episode or the one before that. It might have been with Susan. I can't remember now. So it's where obviously, the longer I've been coaching for, the more of a reoccurring theme I've noticed is that, so for example, members I'll work with, or maybe not even just members I work with, maybe it'll be just people I come across every day at the gym, maybe they're trying to change their health. I've always noticed that the ones that really struggle and have a hard time making any sort of positive change within their habits or something, they're the ones that just always they have so much negative self-talk going on. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, negative self-talk shows up. And if you train yourself to listen for it, you can hear it pretty quickly. The way I like to look at it is, here's a good illustration for anybody listening. If you find that you tend to say a lot of negative things about yourself, but actually say them. If someone pays you a compliment, you deflect it by saying something negative about you. How would you react or feel if someone were to say those things about your mother, your sister, a loved one, anybody in your world, you'd probably react quite hostile. Yet you've given yourself permission to consistently, continuously say these things to yourself about yourself. And we think we are building armor. And if we say it, it will reduce the sting when other people say it. Now ask yourself, just how often do other people say these negative things? Nowhere close to the frequency that you say it to yourself, right? And if you think about how much we add up all those negative things that we say, our mind, our stress response can't really tell the difference between when we say it and when someone else says it. So we're drowning in this abuse that we are perpetuating on ourselves. And we're not really cognizant of just how devastating that is. We wouldn't tolerate it if anybody else behaved that way. And it's a lie that we're building armor and we're protecting ourselves from the potential that someone else might do something like that. So it's worth thinking about. When I hear negative self-talk, I certainly don't criticize a person for doing it, but I bring it to their attention, right? And especially if it's consistent. And you're not going to just suddenly change someone's philosophy around it and fix it. But if that person becomes a little bit more aware of their tendency to do it, that's a first step in kind of catching yourself and saying, hey, oh, no. And if you rewire that thinking and you eventually stop saying it as often, then you start changing, you start feeling better, and it's removing a point of abuse. It is abuse.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm sure you would also, I feel like, yeah, number one, the people who, it's definitely not building armor. I think, if they keep telling themselves, if they say it to themselves enough time, then they'll definitely, it becomes a part of their identity almost. And whereas on the other hand, I feel like I have noticed that the ones, maybe people who are trying to change, transform, perhaps the listener, if you're this deep into the podcast, and the ones that they're the ones that maybe tend to practice gratitude a bit more. I always find that the people maybe that tend to practice gratitude a bit more are the ones that do have a much easier time when it comes to trying to change, especially when it can feel like such an uphill task and when you feel like you have so much ahead of you. I think just celebrating those small wins along the way, realizing that you're no longer out of breath when you're walking up the stairs, they can really, those small things make a huge difference for sure on the journey.
Yeah, while I don't formally practice gratitude or gratitude journaling, I mean, I think those things can work for some people for sure. I just tend to naturally pause and feel very thankful for and express that in conversation with people around me. My post on Instagram today was quite literally, just a point of acknowledgement for what a life dedicated to the gym has done for me. Most of the good things in my life are direct or indirect results of having chosen at 24 to get very consistent and aggressively pursue, gym lifestyle. And it has helped me bounce back from getting off track, in my late 20s and on a different path. And it's led to the career that I have. It's why I'm on this podcast with you. And most of the close people in my life, outside of like old friends and family from my old home city, I've actually met at the gym, right? So it's kind of funny how that's worked. So most of the really, important people in my life out here in Edmonton are people that I actually met in those environments when I pause to think about it. So I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. It's I would put myself in the same boat. I wouldn't say I actively maybe do log it or anything, but I do try and pause every so often, just be like this is a great moment right now. Anyway, I'm very conscious of your time, so before I bring it down, I have a few, maybe like 5 different random subjects. Maybe you can say overrated, underrated, and just
Sure.
There's a few things that I do with guests, and then it's your opinion, whatever you think at the end of the day, and then we can bring it to the end. So number 1, collagen protein powder, because this is something that's getting talked about quite a bit right now.
I'm not really big into the research on this one. I am of the impression that it would be highly overrated when it comes to collagen supplements in general. I think you're probably going to do your best when you're having just good quality, complete protein anyway. Whey protein is a very high quality thing. I'm always very careful around marketing claims around supplements. Things like whey protein work. I mean, casein's fine. Creatine monohydrate's great. And if you choose to use things like caffeine, vitamin D, omega-3, cool, awesome. Pre-workout formulas and supplements are probably highly overrated, to each their own. You don't need BCAAs if you are getting optimal protein in your nutrition. So, but yeah, I'm not deep into the research on collagen. My go-to when it comes to this sort of thing, I'll have a group of people that I follow. They're usually PhDs or very highly credible and educated people. And if their consensus on something and their interpretation of the research is consistent, then I defer to that, right? So there's a lot of value in having people like that. You know, someone like Lane Norton, Dr. Mike Isertel, James Krieger. There's a few more, but they're Greg Coles, Eric Helms. They're great sources of information for that.
Have you heard of examine.com?
Yes.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Dan Feldman, he works for examine.com, and he's one of my resources, and he's a registered dietitian. Recently pulled him into an article I was writing for some research citations to support some of the things that I knew were evidence-based, but I didn't have the research right in front of me. And so, yeah, examine.com has a good reputation.
Oh yeah, for sure. That actually, funnily enough, you kind of answered my next point, I guess, because you've probably heard this. I'm sure you've heard this by now if you've been training people for this long. But I'm sure I've definitely heard this every once in a while. People who say that multivitamin doesn't work. Is there any point taking it? Overrated, underrated? You know, I have my 2 cents, but
they're still going to be overrated. I don't think the research points to, you know, they're certainly not going to be as valuable as eating a diet, you know, a varied diet that's good, you know, rich in fruits and vegetables and nutritious stuff. I mean, I don't know if they're necessarily worthless. It's one of those things that, hey, talk to an RD, talk to your doctor, see what they say about it. You know, I don't really recommend them personally. But if you've got someone who's really deficient in a lot of stuff and they're working on improving their nutrition, the act of taking a multivitamin might be beneficial. And sometimes just those kind of behaviors are healthy behaviors that help put someone on the right track, right? And I don't endorse pseudoscience. I don't think that multivitamins are pseudoscience, but sometimes doing something meaningful in the right direction can spur other healthy behavior. So, you know, I still think they're overrated in the context of this conversation.
Yeah. I think maybe sometimes it's not uncommon for someone to kind of just take it and then neglect 100 other areas in their life, which would serve them way better than taking a multivitamin. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. This is a more of a random one. So when I've been to Montreal a whole bunch of times now because I used to live in Vermont, which was right by the border for a year. I went to Montreal many times, and everyone there was telling me that I had to try I hope I'm not butchering the name. Poutine?
It's disgusting. So you hit on the Canadian who thinks that poutine is absolutely disgusting. It looks like vomit. So yeah, a lot of Canadians are obsessed with poutine. Okay, yeah. So it originated in French. They go poutine, and it is melted cheese, gravy. See, I hate gravy. I'm just weird like that. On soggy fries. I mean, the whole idea is absolutely disgusting. That a lot of people I know love it. To each their own. I mean, my personal opinion, this stuff is absolutely highly overrated. However, there will be a lot of people who will tell you it's wonderful. It's obviously to each their own. If you like that sort of thing, knock yourself out. They're definitely calorie bombs. You can't live off it every day. But I just think it's gross.
Yeah, I think the way you described it, some people could definitely be hearing this and be thinking, wow, that sounds amazing. But like you, I remember I looked at that. I actually didn't try it. I just remember I looked at it and I was just like, I don't know, there's other nicer food, or at least more appealing looking food. It wasn't definitely my thing. I think gravy on chips, with cheese is just I just didn't want it. But yeah, it's definitely a huge thing in Quebec. So I think if you're looking to go to Quebec anytime soon, if you're listening and you're going to Quebec, then maybe you could try it as part of the experience. So last two, Quest protein bars. I know they were very popular for a long time. I don't know. I haven't tried it for a while. What would you say the taste is like?
The early ones were a really big step forward compared to anything that used to exist before them. The old ones were terrible. They tasted horrible from all the mainstream companies. And Quest came along with this high fiber bar that was infinitely more better tasting than everything else was available. A lot of stuff has come along since, grenade bars, one bars, RX bars, that have improved the quality and taste of these things. And I think Quest were forced to change their formula because I think they were including, I don't know what it was, whether it was the type of fiber, whatever, that just wasn't meeting the standard they were claiming it was. I mean, I think protein bars as a whole are highly overrated, but they can be very valuable for someone who needs that quick nutrition. I tend to take them on flights with me. That's really the only place that I ever bother with them, because it helps, you just have something convenient, because I just generally don't buy airline food. It's terrible stuff. So, but the Quest bars, I mean, they're still at Costco now. I bought a box of them a while back and I was underwhelmed. So, several years ago, yeah, they would have been the best thing out there. Now there's so much else that tastes better with better texture that I think they're now overrated. But I think people kind of know that.
Yeah, I think generally that is. I think some people do love protein bars. I think the majority probably aren't too much of a fan. I'm yet to find a protein bar where I'm just like, wow, this tastes amazing. Maybe there's a grenade bar or two that, maybe there's a grenade bar or two actually.
Some of the grenade bars and one bars are really good, and then you can get like protein Snickers bars and Mars bars and stuff. So
yeah,
those are actually
tried that. I haven't tried that.
But I'm also of the opinion, if you really want to go and enjoy a chocolate bar as a treat, go have the fucking chocolate bar. Okay, seriously, enjoy the real thing.
Yeah, and you know what? I think the options for protein bars are much better in Canada and the US, because I'm speaking about experience in Portugal. And in Portugal, the choice we have here is poor.
I just want them to bring back Jack 3D. Okay, that's all I want. The original formula of 3D. That meme is circulating now because of all the Elon Musk stuff. And I shared it on my media. It's like, Elon Musk, the next thing I'm going to do is, like, he actually tweeted, he's like, I'm going to get Coca-Cola. I'm going to buy Coca-Cola and put the cocaine back in it. But then people have been memeing these things and say, yeah, I'm going to bring back the original Jack 3D formula. That stuff was illegal.
That was illegal, wasn't it? Am I thinking
legal? Then they made it illegal. And Canada's a little bit dicey about certain things and caffeine content and whatever you're allowed to have, and dimethylamine 1,3, which I guess is also a precursor to meth or something. I don't know. And I'm not partial to meth, but Jack 3D was great, and I found it just was like mellow and focused. Like a lot of people, like the old 1MR, that stuff. No, hard no. That stuff was terrible, but some people loved it. But either way, yeah, Jack 3D, bring it back.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll have to see if they bring it. If you're listening and you're related to have something to do with Jack 3D, then bring it back. So last one, and I know you're a bit of a gamer, so and I think I know the answer to this already, but I might be wrong. Are you more Xbox or are you more PlayStation, or neither?
I have an Xbox. I mean, I think you at a point choose something. So generationally, I grew up with Nintendo, the original Nintendo system, the Super Nintendo, two of the best systems ever, right? As a kid, you couldn't go wrong. They infinitely better games and whatever than Sega. Then I got a Nintendo 64, but didn't play it very much. I had one game I loved on it and kind of got away from gaming for a while. Then I got a PlayStation 2, and then I won an Xbox, an original Xbox concurrently, but I played the PS2 much more than anything else. And then for whatever reason, I chose to get an Xbox 360, the original ones that used to have the Red Ring of Death, but played a lot of things like Elder Scrolls Oblivion. There was a whole bunch of other great stuff on that. Fallout 3, loved it. I actually had a period of time where I was a big World of Warcraft player from the age of 28 to 30-ish. Yeah, I was totally addicted to it and obsessed with it. And I loved it. So also PC gaming over the years. But I pretty much just stayed with Xbox. Do I think either is superior? As far as like corporations go, like Xbox, meh, Sony, meh, they just butcher the hell out of like Marvel movies. Thank God Marvel actually like has a relationship with them. So the Spider-Man stuff's been pretty good, but like Sony cannot touch maybe movie making the way that Marvel does. Off topic a bit. So you know how we like develop this idea that, ooh, this brand is great, we really like this brand, you know, people like love their Apple products or what have you. And I'm just like really ambivalent towards Microsoft or Sony as companies, but I just happen to, you know, I like the games. Like right now I'm playing Cyberpunk 2077. My favorite game of all time is Witcher 3. I absolutely love it. And I'm excited for the next one. I like the Elder Scrolls stuff. I grew up on a lot of RPG stuff. I played a lot of sports games. I don't play sports games anymore. Kind of got away from that. But yeah, so I mean, technically I own an Xbox. I'm ambivalent towards which one.
Okay. So you never went back to Nintendo?
Yeah, you know what? Nintendo probably demographically stayed, and very smart. They sort of stayed out of the battle between Xbox and PlayStation, double down on their Mario stuff, all of the intellectual property that they have, all the classic stuff that's really good. And they made a really fun thing. Like I know Nintendo Switch is supposedly a phenomenal platform. They did Nintendo Wii, I think, is one of the best selling systems of all time. But Nintendo doesn't have the processing capacity, each generation of system, that the Sony and the PlayStation ones do. So the games I'm interested in, like Cyberpunk, I don't even know if it comes out on Nintendo. If it does, I don't think Nintendo has the processing power to do a good job with it.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Because yeah, I was just wondering about Nintendo. I was living in Japan last year, and yeah, it's still like by far the most dominant one, as you'd assume, so it being Japanese. But anyway,
you still call it Famicom there, or is it now
oh, what was that?
Do they still call them Famicoms there, or is it just Nintendo now?
Not that I know of. I have. That's the first time I've actually heard of it, so I assume no.
Super Nintendo in Japan way back was Super Famicom.
I didn't know that. That's the first time I've heard it. Unless it's gone over my head the entire time, then I would probably say no, that they don't say that anymore.
I doubt it.
Yeah. But yeah, otherwise, Andrew, again, thank you so much for coming on. Again, I'm looking forward to following more of your content, what you have to say. You've definitely helped. I'm trying to think how I can phrase this. Just maybe you articulate things very well, unlike what I'm doing right now. You definitely you articulate things super well on posts, on tweets, and captions, and it's just been great to watch your journey from afar. And I've definitely enjoyed watching it, and I'm going to continue enjoying watching you grow and from afar.
I will endeavor not to piss you off, Leo. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. For everybody listening, if you have questions, Instagram is an easy way to find me at Andrew Coates Fitness. I respond to everything, but I would say most of all, you know, if you're a dedicated listener, Leo, if you haven't reviewed his podcast yet or shared it with someone in your world, if you're dedicated, obviously Leo's doing something that inspires you. So find a way to give something back and introduce him to just a few more people, or do a kindness, and that'll go a long way. Thanks, Leo. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind words. And if you're not following Andrew yet, definitely do. I'll put the link to his profile in the show notes.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.